I think in just a moment we'll begin, and I'm so honored to be joined tonight by our new Associate Rabbi, Jordana Cherno-Reeder, by our staff, Stephanie Shapiro, who is, in case you have not met her, she is going to be responsible for our Hebrew education as well as our post-B'nai Mitzvah education. It has not been one role in the past, so we're excited to have a new full-time member of the team. Executive Director Dan is here, Dan Cillian, welcome. And as always, of course, we are going to be led tonight by our wonderful Cantor Aviva Marer. We appreciate you not only sharing with us the haunting words of Echa, Lamentations, but also helping to convene us tonight for Tisha B'Av. I will leave us in your capable hands as we begin.
In this season of returning to our souls, returning to our communities, we know that in this moment we don't feel any kind of returning to normal. But we pray that normalcy will come soon. Hashivenu, we return. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Eilecha, Vena Shuva, Vena Shuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yameinu Kekedem.
The American Jewish World Service writes in an article, on Tisha B'Av we mourn the loss of our sacred space, the temple in Jerusalem, a loss born out of baseless hatred, senseless destruction. We remember and lament all the tragedies that have occurred on this fateful day throughout Jewish history. We collapse time by grieving for old wounds as if they were only just inflicted, and reaching our hands to those who suffered long ago as if they were beside us. As we are reminded by our reading of the book Echa, we must grieve with our fellow human beings not only of time past, but also of the present. Let us therefore expand our grief to include those around the world today who continue to lose that which is sacred to them through forces of violence, oppression, and destruction. They cry out to us from across space, as in Echa chapter 3, do not shut your ear to my groan, to my cry. As we open our ears to the sounds of their weeping, we respond, as in Echa chapter 3, my eyes shed streams of water over the ruin of my poor people. As we widen the source of our grief to include the destruction that continues to take place today, we declare with Echa, let us search and examine our ways and turn back to God. Let us lift up our hearts with our hands to God in heaven. And as we open our hearts to others and remind ourselves we must not only bemoan their suffering, but also act to prevent it, we command ourselves with Echa, arise, cry out in the night at the beginning of each watch, pour out your heart like water in the presence of God. As we mourn for the loss of all that is sacred, may our grief compel us to respond to the suffering of others. May we arise and reach our hands outward, and may we cry out not only in mourning, but also in an ongoing effort to alleviate pain and destruction around the world.
So I was really struck last night by something that Cantor Aviva said. She said one of the things about about Tisha B'Av is that we are supposed to sit in the sadness. That so often it is our natural instinct when something sad happens that we want to cheer ourselves up and we want to move beyond that. And it is so hard to just sit in that sadness, be in that place. But often we have to be in that place, in that sadness, really sit there and dwell there before we can move on to whatever is next, move back to hope. So I was thinking about an example in my life when that was coming to mind at a time when I really had to sit in this sadness. And what occurred to me, what came to my mind, was an example of someone with whom I was very close in my congregation in Cleveland. Lovely, lovely guy, someone who I spent a lot of time with, really wonderful to me and to my family, really involved in a lot of things in the congregation. And a couple of years ago, he was struck with a terminal illness. And he went very, very quickly from being someone who was an active participant in classes to someone who literally didn't even recognize me when I went to visit him in the hospital. And doing the funeral was really hard because of my relationship with him and because of the contributions he made to the world. And I came home and I was talking to Luke about it, and he's like, you know what? You just need to sit. You just need to be in this sadness. You just have to feel this loss. And it really struck me that he was right, that sometimes we need to just allow ourselves to be in that place, to give ourselves the time and the space to be sad, to mourn, to reflect, and not push ourselves to get to the next step until we are ready. So that is one of the goals of tonight, is to give ourselves that space to do just that.
We know that this text, Anima Amin, means so much to our people and has meant so much to our people throughout history. While the Reform movement redefined the text, which says, I am waiting for the Messiah's coming, I think in this moment, it's fair to say that we are all waiting for a safer, healthier, better world. Anima Amin, Anima Amin, Anima Amin. Bemuna Shalema, Beviat HaMashiach, Beviat HaMashiach, Anima Amin, Ve'af al pi sheitmameha, Im kol ze Anima Amin, Anima Amin, Anima Amin, Anima Amin.
We turn to the words of Lamentations during this observance each and every year. And I think there are two ways that the text might resonate with us. One, of course, is the deep and humbling loss that our ancestors clearly felt as their entire way of life was uprooted, as they began to struggle with what the next chapter of Judaism writ large would look like. It required a searching of the soul that can only be expressed in mourning. Of course, there is another resonance of this text as well, something that really, quite frankly, motivated all of us to create this observance. We have not done so in the past, but the idea of being online actually made us more interested in hearing the sounds of Echa, the melody itself, which is unique to the calendar, only hear this melody on Tisha B'Av, it contains the essence of the soul of the Jewish people. This is the melody that has sustained us through great tragedy and has given us strength to continue to build and rebuild. We're so thankful to our cantor for sharing a bit of it now with us.
Thank you, Rabbi. I will be chanting all of chapter 5 from Eicha, and you will hear longing in the trope, in the series of pitches that goes with the text itself. There is also a tradition that when we get to verse 21, which says the text, Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh yameinu kekedem, renew us as our days of old, return us to yourself, O God. The tradition is that we chant that as the second last verse that it is. We chant the last verse, and then we go back and we re-chant Hashivenu Adonai, return us. In this moment we pray, please return us to the world that we miss, that we know, and that we love. Zechor Adonai mehaya lanu habita u'et cherpateinu nachalatenu nohofcha lezarim bateinu lenochrim yetomim hayinu ve'einav Imotenu ke'amanot, meimenu bechesef shatinu, itzeinu bimchir yavo. Al tzavarenu nirdafnu, yeganu velo hunach lanu. Mitzrayim natanu yad, Ashur lisboa lachem, avotenu chatu einam, anachnu avonotehem savalnu, avadim mahashluvanu, porek ein miadam. Benafshenu Navil lachmeinu mipnei cherev hamidbar. Orenu ketanur nichmaru mipnei zal afot ra'av. Nashim betzion inu betulot be'areuda. Sarim biadam nitlu, penei zikenim lo nehdaru. Bachurim techon nasau, unarim ba'etz kashalu. Zikenim mishar shavatu, bachurim min ginatam. Shavat masos libenu, nepach le'evel mecholeinu, nafla ateret roshenu, oina lanu ki chatanu, al ze hayadavel libenu, Al eile chashchu eineinu, al hatzion sheshameim, shualim hilchu vo. Ata Adonai leolam teshev, kisacha ledor vador. Lama lanetzach tishchachenu, Ta'azveinu le'orech yamim. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh yameinu kekedem. Ki Im ma'os me'astanu, katsafta aleinu ad me'od. Hashivenu Adonai elecha, venashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem.
That was very beautiful and definitely full of longing. So I am going to share my screen with you now, and we're going to look at chapter 1. And I'd really like you to pay attention to some of the images in this because I think they're really beautiful. And I'd love for you either to participate vocally or in the chat as we go through this. And I'd love to hear what these images conjure up for you. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to go through some of this together. Alas, lonely sits the city, once great with people, that she was great among the nations. She is become like a widow, the princess among the states is become a thrall. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her. Of all her friends, all her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foe. So I just want to stop there at this point. Any thoughts about these images? What comes to mind? Things that's making you think about? Which is unusual for our text to be this evocative, this full of emotion. So is this stirring anything for you? And again, either you can tell me, I can't see all of you, so feel free just to speak up or to put it in the chats, anything that these lines have brought up for you.
I will jump in. I think it is fascinating the way our texts celebrate the highest of highs and also express the depths of despair. Lamentations is just so devastating, and it's so devastating that I think it's beautiful to actually honor and acknowledge that. So I just think it's incredibly dramatic and extreme. When you look at Song of Songs, it's so overly flowery in its love language. And I find it interesting that our ancestors never kind of did something. It was always to the extreme.
Absolutely.
So we've here been having a conversation about the images of the city being a woman and trying to decide, is that empowering or is that misogynistic? So Eitan, do you want to talk?
No.
Say what you were saying about women are often used.
What? I'm not
He was saying
qualified
kind of
to say
like
that.
he was saying kind of like women are kind of only used as like cities and boats and stuff like that.
Yeah, I say, if anything, I would say it's more misogynistic than empowering.
Interesting.
But it's interesting. So, and we were also talking about, we were talking about how the city's become like a widow, and Elisa asked, so who did the city lose? And so, we had this interesting conversation about, well, okay, you lose the temple or you lose the Jewish people, but other people can come to the city. So how can a city be a widow? Because other people can come. Mm-hmm. If we think about the Romans come or whatever, is the widow an appropriate metaphor? Those were the conversations we wanted to share.
Those are great. Thank you. And I think it's I think you're getting at such an interesting question too, because often the women are associated here with being vulnerable. And so what does that mean? Is that making women vulnerable? Is that empowering them? I think that is asking some really, really important questions. One of the things along those lines I was thinking about is bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheeks wet with tears. That is such a vivid image, but often something that is really associated with women, women who are crying, women, stereotypically cry more than men. And so what does that mean that it's so evocative in this text that that the city, the Jewish people are crying in that way? I think that was definitely one of the things that really struck me. Um, please.
Can I jump in? I'm
Please.
so appreciative of you opening up this space, Rabbi Jordan. I picture, you know, years past when we would have the opportunity to really be sitting down on the floor and to be contemplating this text together. And it's such an intimacy that we're able to experience on Tisha B'Av that we really don't get to experience any other time of the year. This is a beautiful text and very rich. I wanted to thank you first for opening up this space for us. And then my only thought that what the Price family has inspired me to think about, and I'm not surprised. Eitan, I miss you. I miss our confirmation class and our conversations, but thank you for that. I think it's fascinating, regardless of the gender, to think about the way that the tables have been turned with this expression of grief. Think about the chapter 5 that our cantor just chanted. There, the mourning is clearly on our shoulders, and here, though, in the first chapter of the book, it's not us that is in mourning. It's the object of our mourning that seems to be mourning a loss for us. So I think, regardless of gender, it's still just such a fascinating idea to think about who's mourning and for what.
Absolutely. And kind of along those same lines, in that same stanza that we were talking about too, regardless of who's mourning or where that mourning is, this line that there's none to comfort her, all her friends, all her allies have betrayed her, they've become her foes. Like, that would be, on a personal level, I think so extremely devastating to be in that situation. And yet I believe here part of the mourning is that the Jewish people are in that situation when we feel that betrayed and alone without anyone to comfort us. And think about what a difficult place this is to be. No wonder I think it's only one day out of the calendar year, because this isn't a place where we want to be very long, but it's so important to give ourselves that space to be here, to really acknowledge that. So any thoughts on those lines as well?
Well, no matter how many people are around you when you're in mourning, and the same with the people with the country and et cetera, or whatever here, you are alone when you're mourning. No one can do your mourning for you. Mm-hmm. And so you could be surrounded and still be alone.
Absolutely. For sure.
For me, it evokes almost images of destruction of a battle, a war, and this princess, the state that has been betrayed, is imprisoned in the tower because of her power, kind of locked away because of the power.
Interesting. I've never thought of it that way. That is so interesting.
I like that.
I love that. Other thoughts, other reading about that line, about any of that? I'd love to hear.
I just need to respond to that quickly for Risa. I believe that there's a passage in the Zohar, which is a classical, mystical Jewish text that describes God that way, as if you were looking on the ground, looking up at a high window in a tower, and there's a curtain that's covering the window, but every once in a while you get a glimpse of your true love. It's a woman that's she's in the window, she's behind a curtain. And they play with that image in a passage in the Zohar.
Cool. I didn't know that either. We'll have to look that up. Very interesting. I know we were short on any other thoughts.
I just wanted to mention I feel like I feel like I'm like advertising for Eicha. Like I'm, I promise I'm not getting a kickback. I do love this text, but I love I love that it starts so personal. If you look at the pronouns in chapter 1, it says, she sits lonely. She has found no rest. Bitterly she weeps. And by the time you get to chapter 5, it's return us, O God. And so this is not talking about, all the people of the nation mourning. This is one on one. This is the depths of despair. And you're absolutely right, Joanne. There's so much loneliness inherent in mourning. And when I think about, all of her allies have betrayed her and they have become her foes, I think to, in some of our darkest times, even the arms of comforting friends and family just doesn't cut it. And inevitably somebody says something that they really mean to be supportive, and our minds just say, what are you thinking? That's not what I needed to hear. And your friend becomes your foe because you are just in this depths of despair. So I really do think it's so personal, and I love that the pronouns reflect that.
And Cantor Aviva, I think you're 100% right too. And one of the things I love about it as well is so much, thinking about the High Holy Liturgy, that it is both in that singular and in that plural. So it acknowledges, though we as a Jewish people are on these journeys, we also have our own individual journeys to take. And our texts reflect that, and our liturgy reflect that. And I think that is so much of the brilliance of Judaism too, that both collectively and individually, we go on these paths and we have these struggles. To close up, because I know I have to cede the floor, just thinking about this line, all her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places, in the next stanza, just thinking about that, we often, all of us at some point, end up in a narrow place at some point. And it can be different for each of us. And I love that the text acknowledges that we go through these narrow places, but hopefully we can get out of those narrow places as well. That this holiday acknowledges the pain and the difficulty of being in those narrow places. But there is the hope, kind of what Cantor Aviva was talking about at the very end. That line that she repeated is there's hope in that. And that being really in that narrow place can help us get out of the narrow place as well. And that, thus, the brilliance of this holiday.
Oh, thank you so much, Rabbi Jordan. I appreciate that. We have planned to keep you for just a little while longer, but not to make this too long of a ceremony. But we wanted to explore this text in a slightly different way. This is an interpretation of the text we've just studied, and after that we'll conclude with a few verses of prayer that begin with silent prayer. But here is an interpretation of Eicha chapter 1. The stage is barren with 2 chairs. One is for her and one for him, for Jacob. It is hard to picture them together, for they have really never met. Jacob spent most of his time trying to find the space. He dreamt of angels ascending, but never found them himself, until he found his way home, to her, to Zion. It was only his bones that returned, as his children carried them up out of Egypt, but still she waited for him, buried deep within the sands, stone upon stone, to be strengthened by many men, David, Solomon, Hezekiah, Herzl. It was her greatest joy to see her love children of Jacob arrive and build, plant trees and oranges, wheat and barley, figs and vines, milk and honey flowing from the date palms, seeds planted in the desert and blooming. Time and again she bled for her children, the well-worn cobblestones of misery which mark history. They are her story, carried for millennia in her heart. And so when she arrives on the stage and takes her place in her chair, everyone rises in silence, not applause, to honor her and to note that more than the Jewish people have loved Zion, she has loved the Jewish people and kept them. When they speak, she lets him speak first. He bows low 7 times from his chair, atonement for sin or misunderstanding, for his family sent him away into exile. His children and his house neither know their mother. They are meeting her for the first time. Only after he acknowledges the pain he has caused her, the ways in which, while the family is his, he owes everything he has to her, only then she opens her mouth to speak. Deserted like a widow, the queen feels like a slave. I cannot sleep, she offers, as if that would explain the pain of separation, the difficulty of this long marriage. Tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, there is no one to comfort her, and she sits still, alone in her chair. And perhaps our empathy is triggered. We feel her loss and her pain, or perhaps we are not moved. We are unsure whether we are to be her friend or her foe. When I was young, she begins again, wiping the tears away, for she must speak the words she came to speak. When I was young, my skirts were not dirty. I looked to the future with hope and joy, and I thought, haven't you enough of exile? I wondered, when will you return? And even if you returned, would your heart be as pure as it once was when we began, when we first celebrated our marriage vows before you went away? If you return, will you recognize my streets and my cities as your own, the same ones you yourself built, the language you taught me, the belongings that you carried on your back, that which you brought out of the desert? Will you even recognize them now? Have you been away too long? She is unable to continue, and the curtain sets on a darkened stage. Groups gather in the lobby after the performance, breathing out the musty tension of the stage, less sure of their footing now, but finding comfort in the familiarity of friends who speak and talk and walk the same. And soon there are 2 groups in the foyer. Many have been born here, who speak the native tongue, the language once thought extinct, which has been resurrected in the desert stones, spoken in the street, and not only in ancient texts. Interesting to see now how cavalier they are, brandishing about this language which their fathers fought so hard to love, dripping like honey from their tongues, now thrown away like so much garbage awaiting collection and the inevitable dump. Signposts, sandwich wrappers, newspapers, and advertisements. So much success. Their secret love language is now mundane, ordinary, taken for granted. So this group knows that woman and that man intimately. They are so close that they truly do not understand the distance that she feels. They wonder what the fuss is about. That second group in the foyer, that's you and me. We no longer know that woman. Her story often does not move us. Our parents told us the story, and we repeat it to our children, but with each telling, she grows more and more distant. Our group has come to the theater today because we hope to revive that feeling, light a spark, a taste of which we might have felt once or twice on a trip in cool blue bathrooms, scraping sand from our Naot sandals, or maybe at summer camp, when in a trance we saw her gliding across the sweaty floor, wearing white and blessing Shabbat, not as a page in a book, but as something more vital, close to family, invaluable, a devastating personal loss. We each sing her praises in very different ways, but we need each other if she is to survive, to perform again on every stage. We need to speak her language and know her secret streets. We must consider her future because we may not remember, but it is our own. And those who do speak her language, well, they must find something vital, their own devastation, to regain what has been lost, to remember this ancient love that stands between the stones like grit. That grit might remind us of who we are and who we were meant to become. I'll pause now for a moment of silent prayer and reflection.
There is no happy ending. Tisha B'Av is not the service that we close up by all singing together, by promising you the world will return to normal and that we will all be just fine. This is not what this commemoration is. This is intentionally acknowledging where we are, sitting in the grief, and knowing that our history has proven that we as a people will push through to the other side. And so we will close this evening just as we began. Hashivenu Adonai Lecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem. Return us, O God, to you. Return us to the world and the community that we long for. Once we finish this evening, we will not unmute everyone and chat. We'll invite you to sign off. And we wish you all the best and hope that you know that we are always just a click away. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Eilecha, Venashuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yameinu Kekedem. Chadesh, Chadesh, Yameinu Kekedem.
We'd like to thank our clergy partners and our staff for helping coordinate this, and to thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you on Shabbat and throughout the week, and long for a time when we can be together in person to share these experiences in the same space. Take care, be safe.